Hey everybody, this is Joel Toppin again, and this is video number 3 of Navajo Wars. And what I'm going to do in this video is we're going to start pulling some cards and showing how the game plays. We've talked a lot about the map, the pieces, the different cards in the game. Well, now let's start playing this thing and see how it works. I'm going to zoom out here a little bit so we can see the map a little bit better. First thing, we've already created the deck, so the sequence of play is really quite simple. You pull a card and you execute it. That's pretty much the sequence of play, and you just keep doing that until you pull the transitional event card, at which point you follow the procedures of that particular card if you're playing the campaign. It will then transition you to the next period of the game. You'll recreate the deck and so forth. If you're just playing the scenario for that time period, you would determine whether or not the player wins or loses. So here we go. First card draw of the game is Wow. Now, this happens every once in a while. It's kind of rare, but we actually pulled a historic event, which means we are going to execute the event, and this is actually not a good thing for the player, for this one to come up this quick for him. So we'll have to deal with this. First of all, what the Pueblo Revolt does is this was a watershed event in the American Southwest. Native Americans of the Pueblo tribes ousted the Spanish from New Mexico for a number of years. It was several years before the Spaniards were able to return to New Mexico. It's one of the few occasions in history where Native Americans of different tribes banded together, united in common cause, and quite spectacularly ended the Spanish occupation of New Mexico for I'd have to check my notes, but I want to say it's like something like 50 years. Now, what this does in the game is it's going to add 1 enemy AP while this particular event is active, whenever the enemy executes its operational segment. So when you pull an operations card, it's going to give the enemy some APs that they're going to use to spend to execute instructions. What this will do is enhance that number of APs while it's active. This event will remain active until the enemy has pulled 3 red cubes out of the raid pool and placed them into the subjugation of the Pueblos box. Now, at the start of play, a raid pool is constructed here, and it consists of different types of cubes. There's actually, at the beginning of this scenario, 3 black, 3 brown, 3 white, 3 red, and 2 yellow cubes. What these cubes represent are, it depends on what's happening in the game, what they represent, but generally speaking, white cubes represent sheep, brown represents horses. There's actually 1 green cube in this particular pool there. A black cube represents horses or sheep. It's kind of a wild card for the player. The yellow cubes represent slaves. If you pull one of those and you're raiding New Mexico, you capture slaves. Or recapture your own slaves, more properly. So there's also, in addition to the yellow cube, there's red cubes. Those represent the Pueblos. And if you encounter them while you're raiding New Mexico, they will fight against you. What the enemy is going to be trying to do is pull red cubes out of here in order to subjugate the Pueblos. Once they have done that, they will turn all of their attention toward the Navajo. Green cubes represent Spanish and later Mexican soldiers. Blue cubes represent American soldiers. And of course there's no blue cubes in the cup right now. So that's the raid pool. So this event, its basic instruction is you're going to add 1 enemy AP to their ops card draws every time you draw a card. Also, you're going to ignore the enemy instruction display. Now ordinarily what's going to happen is these instructions are going to be executed. Let me explain the display here in detail. First of all, there's a standby, active, and inactive column. The enemy will always try to execute the topmost instruction counter from the active column. Instructions on standby column are never executed. When an instruction has been executed, it slides to the right to the inactive column. The cost to execute an instruction is the number on the bottom. So the enemy, what they would do is they would collect these enemy action point tokens, and what they'll do then is once they've collected all their tokens for that card play, they will then spend them to execute the instructions from top to bottom. So first one's real cheap, it only costs them 1, and then the second one only costs them 2, and now they get to the third one, they have no APs left, or maybe they only have 1 AP left, If that's the case, then they don't have enough APs to execute the next instruction, and so that instruction remains unexecuted. When the enemy can no longer execute instructions, all of the instructions will slide on the active column to fill the top. They maintain their present order. Okay, they all slide up to fill the top, maintaining their present order, but the columns on the inactive, or the markers on the inactive column, will slide down one at a time to fill the topmost empty space on the active column, and you will notice that subtly but importantly changed the order of the instructions. So the enemy is going to do things in a semi-predictable pattern. There's also another thing I can change what the enemy does, and that is before you actually execute instructions, you're supposed to roll 2 dice, and here say I roll a 6 and a 3. Well, in this case, I look at the 6 column, the number next to the die roll symbol for 6, on the active column, and if it's got a black stripe, nothing ever happens. If it doesn't have a black stripe, it flips over. So here I rolled a 6 and a 3, so the one on the 3 column would then flip over, revealing a different type of instruction. Now, if I rolled 2 3s in a row, I would only flip the counter once. So if I rolled double 3s, only one counter would flip, and that would be the one on the 3 column. It would flip just that one time. Let's say I rolled double 6s, boxcars. The marker around there has got a black stripe, nothing happens. So it's possible that when you roll for those instructions, nothing will change. It's also possible that everything could change. What you think is about to happen may not happen. Let's say the topmost instruction you think is going to be a build outpost instruction, and so you planned for that. Well, it could turn out to be something completely different. Now, the instruction markers on the standby column, they are going to enter play when instructed by an event. There are events that will instruct you to roll a die. So let's say I roll 1 die and I roll a 3. The markers on the 3 column swap places. So now this one's out of play, and now this one enters play. And that's going to happen fairly regularly throughout the game. A random instruction is going to swap places with its neighbor to the left. There's also one event in there that'll really throw a wrench in the works, and it makes everything switch places. And so that's what that represents is a complete change in posture, a totally different Indian policy on the part of the colonial power. All right, so that's the instruction display. That's what drives the enemy game. But in this case, the Pueblo Revolt event will tell us to ignore that. So we don't do anything with this until 3 cubes are in this box. And that's really all we have to do to execute the event, is just to put this card out in front of us and realize that this is now in play. Now we do a victory check segment. Here's what's going to happen here. First of all, we gain 1 culture point for each area occupied by at least 1 family member. This is why it's a great idea not to congregate all your families in one area, because if I had all 3 families in one area, I'd only get 1 culture point. In this case, I have them occupying 3 areas, so I get 3 culture points. So I mark those here on the culture track, moving from the 9 up to 0 again, flipping the marker over so it shows plus 10. So it's 1, 2, 3. I subtract 1 corresponding to the raid box value of a raid box that has an outpost marker like a rancho or a mission. During the Spanish period, the enemy is going to place missions on your land. During the Mexican and American periods, they will place ranchos on your land. Well, there aren't any of those, so I don't take any losses. So now I can actually purchase a cultural development card. And I am actually going to purchase Sharp Traders Level 1. The cost is 1 culture point, so I have to mark it down back to 11. And I'm going to go ahead in Vassal module. I'm going to actually drag this down in front of me down here to show that it's in play. And its benefit is that the cost to purchase items with trade goods is reduced by 1. So that's going to make my trade goods more efficient. So that was my expenditure. We next do a military check here. After we've checked our culture, we check our military points. We add 1 military point for each victory point that we occupy in an area. So we occupy this area, it has a victory point value of 3, and this area has a victory point value of 2. but Canyon de Chelly has no victory point value for us. It's valuable enough as a safe haven. You're not rewarded with victory points for occupying it. So that's going to give us 3, 4, 5 points. And then we subtract the VP penalty on the card itself. So we're going to gain a net 3 plus 2 minus 3. We're going to gain a net of 2 military points. So mark that on here. And as the game progresses, the historic events later on, the further you go in the game, the more costly the expenditure here. So you've got to occupy these high VP areas because the later cards are going to start biting into your military points. So we actually ended up here with a gain, but cards towards the end of the period will be taking points from you. So that is the card, and it's been executed. So that's our first card of the game. Let's go ahead and draw the next one. We'll see what it is here before we run out of time. Operations card. Here we go. Let's get started. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to, first of all, the player could preempt the enemy and go first, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let the enemy go first. We have 3 APs to spend, but I don't want to blow them all on this. So I'm going to let the enemy go first. They're going to collect 5 APs plus the bonus. So they're actually going to get a total of 6 APs. So we're going to pull out 6 of these chits. So we got 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, we pulled them all out. Now, we're going to ignore the enemy instruction display. Instead, what's going to happen, per this active event, we are going to use them all to fulfill subjugation of the Pueblo's instructions. Okay? 3 of the instruction counters on here are subjugation of the Pueblos. Well, what the event does is it basically means you ignore this display and treat everything as subjugation of the Pueblos until you have 3 cubes pulled. To fulfill this instruction, what we do is we open the raid pool. In the physical game, you draw these out of a bag or a cup. And what we're going to do is for every AP we spend, we're going to draw a cube. So we're going to spend 1, draw a cube. Spend 1, draw a cube. And we just keep doing this until we have spent all of our APs or we pulled all the red cubes out of the cup. There, we got 1. And last expenditure we'll pull out yellow one. So we only pulled out 1 red. And then all the non-red ones, per the event, go into the recovery box. So they're not going to be in the cup. It's going to be easier for them to round up the Pueblos to conquer them the next time they fulfill an operations segment. So this is a pretty big deal. Also, each red cube up here adds 1 enemy AP every time an operations card is pulled. So having this thing come up early in the game means that the Pueblos are going to be subjugated pretty rapidly here. So the player is going to have his work cut out for us. We fulfilled the top part of the card here. The enemy has executed its operation. So we go to the next line and it says enemy received 4 AP. Well, the enemy has already operated, so we skip that. And now we come down to the next line which says the player may conduct operations. So in our next video, we'll start operating ourselves and see what we can do to try to assist the Pueblos against the Spanish and thus keep the Spanish off our back.